Darnell Hayes pulled his car into the Brightview Auto Group lot just after lunch. The sun glared off rows of shiny SUVs and sedans, each one polished to a mirror shine. He wore dark jeans, clean white sneakers, and a plain navy button-down. Nothing flashy, nothing that screamed important. He didn't need to. He already owned the place. Well, not officially, not until 3 o'clock that afternoon. But the paperwork was done. The bank had wired the funds. The lawyers had signed off. All that was left was walking through the doors and seeing for himself what kind of operation he'd just bought. He stepped out slowly, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the lot like he was just another customer. Maybe he was. After all, he hadn't told anyone who he was. Not yet. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of leather and floor wax. A receptionist glanced up, gave him a polite but distant smile, and went back to her screen. No one rushed over. No one asked if he needed help. That was fine by him. He liked watching how things really worked when no one thought the boss was watching. He wandered past a display of luxury sedans, running a hand along the hood of a silver model. It was smooth, flawless. He noticed a small scratch near the rear fender. Barely visible, but there. He made a mental note. Detail team needed better quality control. "Can I help you find something?" A voice cut in, sharp and impatient. Darnell turned. The man was mid-40s, crisp polo shirt with the dealership logo, name tag that read Greg Sales Manager. His smile didn't reach his eyes. It was the kind of smile you give someone you've already decided isn't worth your time. "Just looking," Darnell said easily. Greg's eyes flicked over him. Jeans, sneakers, no watch, no fancy car in the lot with a dealer plate. "We don't usually get a lot of foot traffic from casual browsers," he said, voice dripping with just enough condescension to sting but not enough to call out directly. "You planning to buy something today?" Darnell didn't flinch. "Maybe. Depends on what's available and how it's presented." Greg raised an eyebrow. "Presented?" "Yeah, like, do your salespeople actually listen? Or do they just push whatever earns them the biggest commission?" Greg chuckled, but it was tight, forced. "We're professionals here. We match customers with the right vehicle for their lifestyle." "Good to hear," Darnell said, "because I've been in places where lifestyle just meant how much they think you can afford based on how you look." Greg's smile vanished for half a second. Then it snapped back, tighter now. "We treat everyone the same. Do you?" Darnell asked, calm as ever. "Because I watched you ignore that woman at the front desk for 5 minutes while you chatted with your buddy over there." She looked nervous. Maybe her first time buying a car. "You ever think she might have needed a little help?" Greg stiffened. "I was handling internal matters." "Right." Darnell nodded toward the finance office down the hall. "Mind if I take a look around back there? I've got some questions about financing options." That was the wrong thing to say. Greg stepped in front of him, blocking the hallway. "That area's for customers who are serious about buying. Not for wandering." "I'm serious," Darnell said. "Prove it," Greg shot back. "Put a deposit down. Otherwise, you're just taking up space." A few nearby employees had stopped what they were doing. One young woman at a desk looked down quickly, but not before Darnell caught the flicker of discomfort in her eyes. "I'm not asking for a test drive," Darnell said, voice still even. "Just a conversation. Is that really too much?" Greg's patience snapped. "Look," he said, lowering his voice but not enough. "I don't know what you're trying to pull, but this isn't a hangout spot. If you're not here to buy, then leave now." The words hung in the air. A couple of customers nearby turned to look. The receptionist froze mid-typing. Darnell didn't argue. Didn't raise his voice. He just looked at Greg for a long moment. Long enough that the manager shifted on his feet, suddenly unsure. Then Darnell turned and walked out. The automatic doors hissed shut behind him. Outside, the Georgia heat wrapped around him like a blanket. He walked to his car, a 5-year-old sedan, nothing special, and leaned against the hood for a second, breathing slowly. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out. A text from his assistant. "All set. Ownership effective 3 p.m. Keys and access code sent to your email." He glanced back at the dealership. Through the glass, he could see Greg strutting back to his team, laughing like he'd just won something. Darnell got in his car, started the engine, drove away without looking back, but he wasn't angry. Not really. He'd seen this before. In boardrooms, in banks, in places that claimed to be open to everyone but had invisible walls built into their floors. What surprised him wasn't the dismissal. It was how routine it felt. Like Greg had done it 100 times before. Maybe he had. Back at his temporary office downtown, Darnell reviewed the employee files. Greg Mallory, 10 years with the company. Top sales numbers. Multiple Manager of the Quarter awards. No formal complaints on record. But Darnell knew better than to trust paper trails alone. He called Maria, the woman who'd been passed over for Greg's job 3 times despite better reviews and higher customer satisfaction scores. She answered on the second ring. "Mr. Hayes?" she said, voice cautious. "Just Darnell," he said. "I visited the lot today." A pause. Then quietly. "I saw. You didn't say anything." "I couldn't," she said. "Not with him watching, but I'm glad you saw it for yourself." Darnell thanked her and hung up. He stared out the window at the Atlanta skyline, thinking about his father, a mechanic who'd spent 40 years fixing cars in a garage behind their house, because no dealership would hire a black man as anything more than a porter. Back in the day, now his son owned one. The irony wasn't lost on him. At 3:02 p.m., the official transfer notification popped up in his inbox. He was the sole owner of Brightview Auto Group. He didn't send an email, didn't call a press conference. He just saved the confirmation, closed his laptop and stood up. Tomorrow, he'd go back. And this time he wouldn't be just another guy in jeans. He'd be the reason everything was about to change. But tonight he'd let Greg enjoy his last few hours of thinking he was untouchable. Because sometimes the best way to fix a broken system isn't to shout at it, it's to walk in quietly and take the keys. 2 days later, the Brightview Auto Group lot looked the same. Same gleaming cars, same bright banners flapping in the breeze. But the air inside felt different. Tense. Like everyone was holding their breath without realizing it. Greg stood in the break room, pouring himself a second cup of coffee. He was still riding high from Tuesday's little victory. Word had spread that he'd kicked out some guy who'd been acting suspicious. A few of the newer salespeople had even complimented his strong leadership. He liked that. Liked feeling in control. "Morning, Greg," said one of the finance guys, nodding as he passed. "Morning," Greg replied, flashing a confident grin. "Gotta keep standards high around here. Can't let just anyone wander through like they own the place." He chuckled to himself, remembering the look on that guy's face when he told him to leave. Quiet, humiliated, exactly how it should be. But by 10 o'clock, the mood shifted. A black SUV pulled into the manager's spot, the one Greg always used even though it wasn't technically his. Out stepped a woman in a sharp gray suit, followed by 2 men in matching navy blazers. No logos, no name tags. Just calm, purposeful strides. Greg frowned. "Who's that?" he asked aloud, more to himself than anyone else. Before anyone could answer, the receptionist rushed over, eyes wide. "They're from corporate. HR and legal. They want everyone in the conference room, now." Greg straightened his shirt. "Probably just another audit," he muttered, but his stomach twisted anyway. The staff gathered quickly. Sales, service, admin, even the detail crew. Whispers buzzed like static. No one knew what was happening, but they all sensed it was big. The woman from HR stood at the front, calm and composed. "As of this morning," she began, "Brightview Auto Group has been acquired by Horizon Mobility Group. This dealership is now under new ownership." A murmur rippled through the room. "Acquired since when?" "Effective immediately," she continued. "All operations will continue as usual, but leadership will transition under the direction of the new managing owner." Then the door opened again, and in walked the man Greg had thrown out on Tuesday. Only this time, he wore a tailored charcoal suit, crisp white shirt, no tie. His posture was relaxed, but his presence filled the room. He didn't smile, didn't gloat, just stood there, calm and steady, like he'd been waiting for this moment his whole life. Greg's coffee cup slipped from his hand. It hit the floor with a loud clatter, brown liquid splashing across his shoes. No one laughed. No one even looked at him. All eyes were on the man at the front. "Good morning," the man said, voice low but clear. "My name is Darnell Hayes, and as of yesterday, I own this dealership." Silence. Then slowly, Maria, the woman who'd been quietly running half the sales floor for years, stood up and started clapping. One by one, others joined. Not everyone, but enough. Greg stayed seated, face pale, fingers gripping the edge of the table like it might save him. Darnell didn't mention the incident. Not once. Instead, he talked about customer trust, fair treatment, and building a team that reflected the community they served. He spoke about transparency in pricing, honest financing, and making sure every person who walked through those doors felt respected, no matter what they drove in, what they wore, or how much they planned to spend. "I'm not here to tear everything down," he said. "I'm here to build something better, and I'll need all of you to do it." After the meeting, people drifted back to their stations, buzzing with questions. Some were nervous, others hopeful. A few shot Greg wary glances. He tried to act normal. "Probably just a figurehead," he told a junior salesman. "Rich guy playing owner for a few months, then he'll bail when profits dip." But his voice lacked its usual swagger. Later that afternoon, Greg cornered Darnell near the service bay, forcing a smile. "Look, man, about the other day," Darnell held up a hand. "Not now. But I didn't know." "That's exactly the problem," Darnell said, voice quiet but firm. "You didn't know. And you didn't care to find out." He walked away before Greg could respond. Over the next 2 days, Darnell did something unexpected. He disappeared into the background. He didn't sit in the manager's office, didn't bark orders. Instead, he showed up early, stayed late, and talked to everyone. He asked the detail guy how long it took to prep a car for delivery. He listened to the receptionist explain how customers often got frustrated waiting for callbacks. He sat with the finance team and asked how they explained loan terms, really explained them, not just rushed through the paperwork. And he noticed things, like how Maria always stayed late to help new customers understand their options, even when she wasn't on the clock. How the young mechanic in the back bay, barely 20, knew every engine in the lot by sound. How the only black salesperson on staff had been stuck selling used compacts for 3 years, never given a shot at the luxury line. He also noticed who avoided him, who suddenly became too busy to talk, who whispered in corners when he walked by. Greg was the worst of them. Every time Darnell entered a room, Greg's shoulders tensed. He'd force a greeting, but his eyes darted away. Once, Darnell caught him arguing with another manager in the parking lot, voice low and angry. "He's trying to make us look bad, like we've been doing something wrong." But the truth was already leaking out. One evening, as Darnell locked up, a folded note was tucked under his windshield wiper. He opened it under the dim streetlight. It was typed, no signature, but the message was clear. Greg's turned away customers for not fitting the brand. He told finance to deny loans to people from certain zip codes. He said it was risk management. We all knew what he meant. Darnell read it twice. Then he folded it carefully and put it in his pocket. The next morning, he invited Maria to coffee at a diner across the street. She arrived 10 minutes early, hands wrapped around a to-go cup, eyes tired but alert. "You didn't have to do this," she said. "I wanted to," Darnell replied. "Tell me the truth. Not what you think I want to hear." She hesitated. Then slowly the stories came out. The qualified woman denied a sales position because she wouldn't connect with our typical buyer. The elderly couple pressured into a high-interest loan because they wouldn't understand the better option. The way Greg would joke about certain neighborhoods, certain names, certain styles of dress, it wasn't always loud, she said, but it was always there. "Like a stain you couldn't scrub out?" Darnell nodded. "Thanks for trusting me." Back at the dealership, he called his legal team. Not to fire anyone yet, but to start documenting everything. Policies, emails, customer complaints buried in old files. He needed proof, not just stories. That same day, Greg tried again. He waited until the lot was quiet, then approached Darnell near the showroom. "I made a mistake," he said, voice strained, "but I'm a good manager. Sales are up. Customers are happy. Don't throw that away because of one bad day." Darnell looked at him, not with anger, but with something heavier. "Disappointment. One bad day," he repeated softly. "Or one bad pattern." Greg opened his mouth, then closed it. That night, Darnell sat in his home office reviewing security footage from the past 6 months. He watched Greg turn away a young man in a hoodie, watched him steer a black family toward a used car lot 10 miles away, claiming nothing available here, watched him laugh with another manager after mimicking a customer's accent. It wasn't just one moment. It was a habit. And habits like that didn't just hurt people, they poisoned everything around them. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. He thought about his father again, about all the doors that had been closed in his face. And now, Here he was, holding the key to one of them. But opening it wasn't enough. He had to make sure it stayed open. For everyone. He picked up his phone and dialed his attorney. "We're ready," he said. "Tomorrow, the real work would begin." Darnell didn't move fast. He never did. Rushing made people defensive. And when people got defensive, they stopped listening and started hiding things. So he kept showing up like any other day, early, quiet, watching. But now he had a purpose behind every conversation. He started with the files, old customer complaints buried in digital folders labeled resolved or no action needed. One from last spring. A woman said she was told the SUV she wanted was already promised, even though the lot had 3 sitting untouched. She mentioned the sales manager seemed uncomfortable when she asked about financing. Her zip code? Southeast Atlanta. Predominantly black neighborhood. Greg had signed off on the response, inventory error. No policy violation. Another file. A young man in his 20s dressed in work clothes came in looking for a reliable used sedan. Greg had him escorted out after he asked too many questions about warranty coverage. Security footage showed the kid hadn't raised his voice, just stood there confused as 2 staff members flanked him toward the door. The report called it trespassing due to suspicious behavior. No follow-up. No apology. Darnell printed the pages, highlighted the inconsistencies, and tucked them into a folder. Then he went back to the lot, not as the owner, but as someone trying to understand. He spent an afternoon in the service bay, leaning against a tool cart, while the lead mechanic explained how they tracked repair histories. The guy, a wiry man named Rico with grease permanently etched into his knuckles, didn't care who Darnell was. He just liked that someone was finally asking real questions. "You know," Rico said, wiping his hands on a rag. "Greg used to tell customers their check engine light was nothing, just so they wouldn't cancel the sale. Then they'd come back 2 weeks later. Engine blown, and we'd have to fix it under warranty. Cost the shop money. Made us look bad." Darnell nodded. "Did anyone report it?" Rico snorted. "To who?" Greg was the report. Later, Darnell visited a small auto shop on the edge of town, owned by a man named Elijah who'd been fixing cars since the 80s. The place smelled of oil and old tires, but everything was clean, organized, honest. "Brightview," Elijah said when Darnell mentioned the dealership. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "Yeah, I know him. Couple months back, a lady came in here crying. Said she went to Brightview to trade in her old Corolla, get something safer for her kids. Guy at the desk, sounded like your manager, told her, 'We don't take cars from that part of town.'" "Too much wear." Darnell's jaw tightened. "She lived in East Point. Yeah, and her car? Ran like a dream. I bought it from her myself." Darnell stayed another hour listening to more stories about customers redirected, dismissed, or quietly discouraged. Not with signs or rules, but with tone, timing, and silence. Back at the dealership, Greg was unraveling. He'd stopped making eye contact with Darnell. Started eating lunch in his car. One afternoon, Darnell overheard him on the phone near the dumpsters. "I swear, man, this whole thing is a setup. He's looking for a reason to fire me so he can bring in his own people. It's not fair." But fairness wasn't the point. Truth was. Darnell called a staff town hall for Thursday morning. No agenda, just an open floor. He stood at the front, hands in his pockets, voice calm. "I'm not here to point fingers," he began, "but I am here to fix what's broken. If you've seen something unfair, if you've been asked to do something that didn't sit right, I want to hear it. Not today, not in front of everyone, but anytime. My door's open. Or my email. Or just catch me on the lot," he paused. "And if you're worried about retaliation, don't be. From now on, that kind of fear doesn't live here." After the meeting, Maria stayed behind. "You're really doing it," she said, almost in awe. "Doing what?" "Making it safe to speak up." That afternoon, 3 employees sent anonymous notes through the new ethics form Darnell had quietly launched on the company intranet. One described how Greg pressured sales staff to upsell extended warranties to elderly customers who didn't understand them. Another detailed how he'd blocked a qualified Latina technician from moving to the luxury service team, saying, "She's better suited for the basics." The third note was just a name, Tanya Brooks. And a date, March 12th. Darnell looked it up. Tanya had applied for the assistant manager role last spring. Her resume was strong. 10 years in auto sales, top performer at her last dealership, glowing references. She never got an interview. Greg had written not a culture fit in the internal log. Darnell reached out to her. She answered on the first ring. I knew it, she said, voice thick with emotion. I walked in, saw his face, and knew I didn't have a chance. But I applied anyway. For my kids, wanted to show them you try even when the doors closed. They talked for 20 minutes. At the end, she said, if you ever need someone who knows how to treat people right. I'm still looking. Darnell made a note. Call Tanya back. Offer position. Meanwhile, Greg's behavior got worse. He started pulling aside loyal staff after hours, whispering that Darnell was trying to ruin the brand and scare off our real customers. He claimed the new owner didn't understand how luxury sales work. But the truth was, people were starting to see through him. One night, Greg went to a sports bar a few blocks from the dealership with one of the finance reps, a guy named Dev, who'd worked there for 6 years and owed Greg a few favors. They sat in a dim booth, beers in hand. I'm telling you, Greg said, voice slurring slightly, this guy's gonna run us into the ground. Thinks he can just walk in and change everything because he's got money and a fancy title. He doesn't know this business. Dev stayed quiet, sipping his drink. And that stunt the other day? Greg laughed bitterly. Acting like he's some kind of hero, please. If I'd known he was the owner, I would have kissed his shoes. But I didn't, and you know what? He deserved it, walking around like he belonged. Dev set his glass down slowly. You really believe that? Damn right I do, Greg said. People like him, they don't belong in places like Brightview. Never have. What Greg didn't know was that Dev had been recording the conversation on his phone. Not out of malice. Just caution. He'd seen what happened to people who crossed Greg. And now, with a new owner who actually listened, Dev wanted to make sure the truth had a chance to breathe. The next morning, Dev slipped the audio file to Maria. She listened once, then forwarded it to Darnell with a single line. You need to hear this. Darnell played it in his car before work. Greg's voice, smug, bitter, laced with contempt, filled the quiet space. When it ended, Darnell sat still for a long time. Not angry, just sad because it wasn't just about him. It was about every person Greg had made feel small, unwelcome, or less than. He called his legal counsel. I've got enough, he said. Let's prepare for termination. Then he texted Maria. Can you cover the floor this afternoon? I need to make a few calls. As he drove to the dealership, he passed a bus stop where a young woman stood holding a toddler's hand, scanning the street like she was looking for hope. Darnell thought about Tanya, about Rico, about the woman turned away from the trade-in counter. He wasn't just fixing a dealership. He was rebuilding trust, one honest conversation at a time. And Greg? He'd had his chance. Now it was someone else's turn to lead. The morning sun hit the dealership windows at a sharp angle, casting long shadows across the conference room table. Darnell sat at one end, a folder open in front of him, a glass of water untouched. He wasn't in a suit today, just a dark sweater and slacks. He wanted this to feel human, not like a courtroom. Greg walked in 10 minutes late, tie crooked, eyes darting around like he was looking for an exit that didn't exist. Close the door, Darnell said. Greg did, then stood awkwardly near the chair across from him. You wanted to see me? Sit down. He sat, fidgeted, cleared his throat. Look, if this is about the town hall I've been thinking, maybe I was a little too hard on the team. I'll adjust my approach. I'm willing to learn. Darnell didn't respond right away. He just looked at Greg, not with anger, but with a quiet kind of disappointment that somehow cut deeper. Then he tapped his phone. A voice filled the room, Greg's voice, slurred and bitter from the bar recording. People like him, they don't belong in places like Brightview. Never have. Greg's face went white. That's taken out of context, is it? Darnell asked. Because it sounds pretty clear to me. He flipped open the folder. March 12th. Tanya Brooks applies for assistant manager. You write not a culture fit, but her references say she ran a top-performing team in Marietta. What part of her didn't fit, Greg? Her name, her skin? Greg opened his mouth, then shut it. June 3rd, Darnell continued. Mrs. Langley, 72 years old, comes in to buy a sedan for her doctor visits. You push her into a 5-year extended warranty she didn't understand. She calls back crying because she can't afford her meds now. You told finance to just process it, she'll forget. I was trying to hit quota, Greg blurted. Everyone does it. Not everyone, Darnell said softly. Just the ones who think people are easy to fool. He leaned forward. Here's what I don't get. You're good at sales. You know cars. You could have been part of something real here, but instead you chose to make people feel small so you could feel big. Greg's hands shook. I didn't know who you were that day. That's the problem, Darnell said. You didn't care to find out. And it wasn't just me. It was the woman in the headscarf you told we don't do financing for walk-ins. It was the young guy in the hoodie you had security follow around like he was stealing air. It was Maria, passed over 3 times while you got promoted for leadership. Greg looked down. I can change, maybe, Darnell said. But this place can't wait for you to figure it out. Not when real people are getting hurt. He closed the folder. You're placed on administrative leave effective immediately. HR will walk you out in 5 minutes. Your access is revoked. Your final paycheck and separation agreement will be sent by mail. Greg stood up fast, chair scraping the floor. You're firing me over a few complaints? After 10 years? Over a pattern, Darnell corrected. And over trust. You broke it with customers, with staff, with this brand. I can't rebuild that with you in the room. Greg stared at him, jaw clenched. For a second, it looked like he might say something sharp, something final, but then his shoulders slumped. He turned and walked out without another word. 10 minutes later, he was gone, box of personal items in hand, escorted by security to his car. No dramatic exit, just silence. Back inside, the staff buzzed with nervous energy. No one knew exactly what happened, but they knew something had shifted. Darnell gathered everyone in the showroom that afternoon. I won't lie to you, he began. We've had issues here. Not just with sales numbers, but with how we treat people. That ends now. He didn't name Greg, didn't drag him through the mud, but he made it clear, respect wasn't optional. Fairness wasn't a favor. It was the foundation. Then he did something unexpected. He called Maria to the front. As of today, he said, Maria is assistant manager. She's been doing the job for years. Now she'll get the title and the pay to match. The room erupted in applause. Maria blinked back tears, nodding. 2 moved to speak. Darnell also announced a new community program. Free safety inspections every Saturday at local churches and community centers. No sales pitch. No pressure. Just honest help for people who needed it. Over the next week, things began to change, slowly but surely. Customers noticed. One older man came in just to say, Your people actually listened to me today. First time in 20 years I didn't feel like I was being sold to. A young couple, both teachers, bought their first car together and thanked the sales rep for explaining every fee without rushing them. Darnell hired Tanya Brooks. She started the following Monday, walking in with her head high, ready to lead with kindness and clarity. Meanwhile, news of the ownership change and the culture reset reached a local reporter. She called for a comment. Darnell agreed to a short interview, not at the dealership but at a coffee shop down the street. Why make such big changes so fast? She asked. Because people shouldn't have to wait for dignity, he said. Great service isn't about the car. It's about the person behind the wheel. The article ran the next day with a photo of Darnell shaking hands with a customer outside the service bay. The headline, New owner puts people before profit at local dealership. Not everyone was happy. A few longtime clients called to complain that things feel different. One even threatened to take his business elsewhere. Darnell thanked them for their honesty and wished them well. He wasn't trying to please everyone, just the right ones. Then one evening, as he locked up, he found an envelope taped to his windshield. No return address. Inside was a handwritten note. My name is Evelyn. I came in last year looking to trade my old Camry. The manager told me cars from my neighborhood don't hold value. I left ashamed. Saw your article. Just wanted you to know I'm coming back next week, and I'm bringing my daughter. She's buying her first car. Darnell read it 3 times. Then he folded it carefully and put it in his glove compartment, right next to the note from the first anonymous employee. That night, he called his dad. Remember that dealership on Peachtree you used to say would never hire a man like us? He asked. There was a pause. Then a soft chuckle. Yeah, what about it? I own it now. Silence. Then quietly, You did good, son. Darnell smiled. Not yet, but I'm getting there. Because the real work wasn't just firing the wrong person, it was making sure the right ones finally got a seat at the table. And this time, the door would stay open for everyone. 3 months later, the lot still gleamed under the Georgia sun, but now it felt different. Lighter. Like the air itself had been cleaned out. The dealership had a new name, Horizon Atlanta, but the real change wasn't in the sign. It was in the way people moved through the space. Customers lingering without fear, staff greeting everyone like they mattered, mechanics waving at buyers like old friends. Darnell stood near the service entrance, watching a young couple test drive a compact SUV. The woman laughed as her partner fumbled with the backup camera. The sales rep, a woman who'd once been stuck selling only used sedans, walked beside them, patient, smiling, no pressure in her voice. Just help. Inside, Maria ran the floor like she'd been born for it. She'd reorganized the sales schedule so no one was ever left waiting. She'd started a weekly customer story meeting where the team shared real feedback, not just complaints but moments of connection. One rep talked about an elderly man who cried when they helped him buy a car after his wife passed. Another shared how a single mom finally felt respected when they explained financing without jargon. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. Greg was gone for good. His lawsuit, filed 2 weeks after his firing, had fizzled fast. The evidence was too clear. The recordings, the buried complaints, the pattern of behavior. His lawyer advised settlement. Darnell agreed, but only if Greg signed a non-disparagement clause and completed mandatory bias training. Not as punishment. As a chance, however slim, that he might one day understand what he'd done wrong. Darnell didn't gloat. He just closed the file and moved on. What mattered now was what came next. He'd launched the mentorship program the month before, partnering with local high schools to bring in teens interested in automotive careers. Every Saturday, kids from neighborhoods once quietly turned away by dealerships like this one now walked through Horizon's doors in coveralls, learning how to check oil, read diagnostics, even shadow sales meetings. One boy, barely 16, had asked Darnell point blank, "You really let people like me work here?" Darnell had looked him in the eye. "People like you built this country. Why wouldn't I?" The kid grinned like he'd just been handed a key to something bigger than a car. Then came the letter. It arrived on a Tuesday, tucked inside a plain white envelope. No return address, just a shaky cursive name at the bottom. Evelyn R. Darnell opened it in his office. "Dear Mr. Hayes, I came in last week with my daughter just like I promised. You might not remember me. I was the woman turned away last year for not qualifying. This time your team treated us like family. My daughter bought her first car, a certified pre-owned Corolla, safe and reliable. She cried when they handed her the keys. Said no one had ever taken her seriously before. I just wanted you to know you gave us more than a car. You gave us back our dignity, thank you." Darnell read it twice. Then he pinned it to the bulletin board behind his desk, right next to the photo of his father standing in front of his old garage, wrench in hand, pride in his eyes. His dad never got to work at a place like this. But his son didn't just work here, he owned it. And he'd made sure it stood for something better. That evening, Darnell stayed late, walking the empty lot one last time before locking up. The streetlights hummed softly. A breeze carried the scent of rain. He thought about all the small moments that had led here. The quiet courage of Maria speaking up. Rico telling the truth in the service bay. Dev recording that conversation not out of revenge but hope. Even Evelyn writing that letter, choosing to believe change was possible. This wasn't just a business turnaround. It was a restoration. The next morning, an elderly woman pulled into the lot in a 20-year-old Buick. She parked carefully, smoothed her dress, and walked slowly toward the entrance, gripping a worn handbag like it held her last bit of courage. Maria saw her first. She stepped out to meet her. No clipboard, no script, just a warm smile. "Good morning. Can I help you find something today?" The woman nodded. I'd like to buy a new car. Something safe. My doctor says my old one isn't reliable anymore." "Absolutely," Maria said gently. "Let's take a look together." An hour later, Darnell watched from the office window as the woman, her name was Mrs. Thompson, stood beside a brand new silver SUV, tears in her eyes as Maria handed her the keys. She hugged Maria tight, then turned and spotted Darnell through the glass. She walked over. "You're the owner?" she asked. "I am." She studied him for a long moment. Then, without warning, she pulled him into a hug. "My late husband always said no one would ever treat me fairly after he was gone," she whispered. "But you did." Darnell didn't correct her when she patted his arm and called him son. Some titles aren't earned by blood, but by action. Later that day, he sat in his office reviewing the quarterly report. Sales were up, not because they'd pushed harder, but because trust had grown. Customer satisfaction scores hit an all-time high. Employee turnover dropped to 0. Even the detail crew had started staying late to help prep cars for Saturday's community event. He leaned back, quiet for a moment. None of this was about revenge. It wasn't even about being right. It was about making sure no one else had to walk out of this place feeling small, just because someone decided they didn't belong. His phone buzzed. A text from Tanya. "Mentorship group just fixed their first engine. They're beaming." Darnell smiled. Outside, the sun dipped low, casting golden light over the rows of cars, each one more than metal and glass. Each one a promise of safety, of freedom, of being seen. He stood up, grabbed his jacket, and headed for the door. Tomorrow would bring new customers, new challenges, new chances to get it right, but tonight he'd let himself feel it. The quiet pride of knowing that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk back through a door you were once thrown out of, and hold it open for everyone else.